All right, so welcome everyone to the first inaugural event of the TAA Traditional Astrology Australia Zoom event. If I seem distracted at all, it's just because I'm something of a Zoom novice, so I'll try and take a crash course by the time we get to the next event. So for anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Josh Hancock, and I'm one of the administrators of the new TAA page. And I just want to take a moment to welcome everyone to this event and to just spend a minute or two just circling around what it is that we're hoping to achieve with the TAA site. So obviously, everyone who's signed up is aware of the fact that by its namesake, it is Traditional Astrology Australia. And part of the reason that we wanted to create this banner platform was to be able to give us an opportunity to come together as practitioners of traditional concepts, not because anyone is averse to modern principles per se, but rather because we are underrepresented where it comes to communities around the world, but most particularly in Australia. I think that everyone on the call would recognize that Australians in the astrological world tend to be rather underrepresented. We sort of get drowned out in the bright lights of places like America and Europe. So part of the goal that we wanted to achieve was to bring some focus to the talented work. The talented astrologers who
Oh,
are working down here
you've
in the Southern
gone,
Hemisphere.
you've gone silent. You've dropped
Oh,
out sound-wise.
how's that? Back, yeah. So yeah, like I say, part of what we wanted
Yeah.
to achieve with the TAA was to be able to bring some focus to the talented Australian astrologers that we have and put ourselves on the map a little, right? So part of what we're going to get rolling with tonight is spending a little time exploring traditional concepts and where we're at as practitioners of traditional astrology and where it sits in a wider context. So, for anyone who may not have done so yet, I would encourage everyone to head over to the TAA site and sign up as an affiliate, which is basically joining our mailing list. So, if you wanted to be updated with the upcoming events, we're growing our offering. So, if anyone hasn't been to the page for a little while, we do have some exciting things on there. We're trying to balance our offerings between free events that bring us together as a community and events that showcase the work of the talented astrologers that we have, and with some cost associated with it. So we want to keep it really, really low or as low as is practicable, just by virtue of the fact that we really want to be community forward and find ways to bring us together to talk about all of the exciting topics that we're so starved for very often. So if we can find a way of doing that, then we hope to use this platform to be able to do it and achieve it. And obviously with some running costs involved. So, we want to keep things fairly low, but be able to give people what they're interested in. So, as I say, let's dive into tonight's material. So, everyone's here because we're here for a panel discussion with our four leading Australian astrological educators. We have Mari Garcia, Eve Dembowski, Joy Usher, and the lovely Shu Yap, who is down there at the bottom. Can give us all a wave so everyone knows who the four of you are.
You
So,
you can unmute
oh yes, let
Chu
me.
because she's mute. Yeah, there she is.
There we
Hi,
go.
Chu.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
So for anyone who's not aware of who Joy, Mari, Eve, and Shu are, we might just quickly go around and if you wanted to just briefly introduce yourselves with a little bit of your background so people are aware of who you are, how long you've been around the traps. Feel free to embellish. Eve, we'll start with you because I can
Oh,
feel that you're
okay. All
bursting
right.
at the seams.
Well, I'm Eve Dembowski. I've been teaching principally Hori, but I also run a sort of what I call the foundations course, which is more natal astrology from a traditional perspective, which I actually developed because I think that's how I would have liked to have learned astrology. So it was kind of like, if I were to be a beginner, this is the course I would want to do. However, I've been teaching for about uh, probably about 15 years now. And I've been interested in studying traditional astrology for probably since probably began last century. I know it sounds like a long time ago, but yeah, and this is who I am. I'm based in Melbourne, if that's important to know. And yes, and it's lovely to see a lot of names and faces that are familiar here. So that's lovely. So I guess that's it for me.
What about you, Joy?
Oh, hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I don't know what we're going to, pearls of wisdom we can give you as a panel. I just think, oh, I don't know. But anyway, I'm better to be on topic than off topic. But what was my topic again? Oh, yes. How long I've been doing astrology. I started 1990. Finished a course and then got straight into Rob Zoller's medieval course, which was really, I've kind of been there for a long time. And so it's sort of lovely to see not everyone catching up, but other people getting involved and kind of getting excited about the texts that I was excited about 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So, yeah, lovely to be here, and blessings to you all. That's me.
Over to you, Murray.
Well, like Joy, I started studying astrology in the 90s, got into Rob Zoller, and Joy and I have been teaching together since 2001. And traditional astrology, once you get a taste for it, look, there's no going back. There's just no going back, you know. It's opened so many other doors that you think, how did I ever do without it? So here I am.
And the lovely Shu Yap.
I feel really honored to be in this company of these three women who actually are my heroes in astrology. I'm not sure if you all know that, but I've
Oh,
been following your work for a long time. Eve was my teacher. Um, Joy's book is continually by my side, and Mari, I'm always chasing her lectures at conferences and whatnot. So I don't know if you three know that, but I hold you in really high esteem, and I'm actually very honored to be actually sitting here with you all. Like I said to Josh, I'm a bit of a fangirl, so I might be a bit nervous, but having said that, I've been studying astrology for quite a while, I guess for I think about 25 years now. I feel starting to feel really old. I used to always be the young one at all these meetups, and now I'm like I'm the middle-aged one. But yeah, like most people, started off with like more of a psychological bent. I discovered traditional astrology, never turned back. And now I've just graduated from becoming a Jyotishi, so doing more, well, not that I'm doing more, I'm also expanding into more Vedic sciences. And, to me, astrology sort of doesn't have any borders. And I love the fact that astrologies of all different cultures, we share the one common thing, and that's the sky. And it's amazing how different cultures have similar viewpoints on various star laws and star configurations. And the only thing that connected them was the sky. There was no internet, no communications, back in those ancient, say, Taoist times to the Egyptian times. So it was, I just love that. I love that we're intuiting the same thing from the sky. And I feel that I spend a lot of time outside as well, like looking at the sky, and I think that's a really important part of our study. So here I am.
absolutely. It's really a beautiful way of putting it, Shu. And I guess one thing to just circle around before we make our way through,
Oh,
uh,
Oh,
I think that one of the things that we imagine is going to happen with the platform of the TAA is that we're going to attract people who are interested in traditional concepts, as well as people who are traditionally curious. So people who may be going through the modern route and maybe practicing in that vein. And one of the things that this phrase that has been sort of knocking around my head the last couple of weeks as I've been thinking about this event tonight was that we don't want to draw blood in any sense. That where it comes to the divide between, or the apparent divide, I should say, between
Mm.
approaches of practice from a humanistic, psycho-spiritual perspective versus a traditional perspective. There are a lot of ways that we overlap. And because I'm cognizant of the fact that we're going to attract people who are traditionally curious, part of what will happen as you explore different approaches to celestial symbolism is that we're bound to find points that will press certain people's buttons, and that will stretch their understanding of what symbolism is able to bring through, and not to mention strike many an ethical grey area that is rife for debate. And we only have to scratch the surface of our community to see some pretty stark examples of ways in which we have a rigorous and healthy uh, discourse between ourselves. So, just circling around that notion that we're not here to draw blood. Anyone who may have come through from a more humanistic or psycho-spiritual perspective, that the intention with this platform is not to pretend that those applications to astrology don't exist, but rather to shine a light on that which is underrepresented in our community, not just in Australia, but also globally, which is these traditional techniques. And with the aim being that we're predominantly trying to shine a light on them, but not at the exclusion of anything else. So just to sort of say that as a mini disclaimer. But using that beautiful comment, Shu, as a launching pad into our first question for tonight, one of the things I think that everyone on this call is cognizant of is the fact that traditional astrology has been going through a renaissance in recent times, where it's gone from being a small subset of diehards that were studying these ancient techniques, and it's grown into this huge following across the world. And from we could look at this from the early reemergence of things like the Project Hindsight endeavor right through to what we have today with very well-known astrologers, people like Demetra George, Chris Brennan, Deb Holding, all putting forward ideas that have been uh, propounded throughout history. It started to come back and reemerge. So I've got my note here. It says, in the interest of in the origins of astrology has grown at an exponential rate. And to our panelists, what do you feel has drawn people to this approach to astrology? Why do you feel that this is something that has reemerged and taken root in our community? Eve, do you want to get us
Sure, I'll
rolling?
start. So, I mean, there's a couple things. I mean, firstly, I think that we are in a renaissance because of the translations that are happening, and we probably need to take our hats off and bow and kiss the ground that
Mhm.
people, particularly like Ben Dykes, who I don't know is some superhuman translator who's just keeps coming out with new translations. But I think that has, created this ability for us to actually have access, albeit to translated works. And I think it's really important that we always remember something is always lost in translation. So an ancient text is inevitably going to have things that are going to be that we have to kind of, dig around and figure out what they're really trying to say, because it's never as clear as if it was written in the language that it was, or if we were reading it in the language that it was originally written in. But I do think that one of the reasons that people are drawn to the tradition is that, well, maybe I'm speaking from personal experience. I learned modern, psychological astrology to begin with. And after a couple years, learning the basics, and then I suddenly found myself, to my horror, getting bored. And I thought, there's got to be more to it. It's been thousands of years that this thing has been going on. How can it be boring? It can't, there's got to be more to it. And that's what kind of drew me to looking at, the tradition or traditional works, which were few and far between at the time. But, it just seemed to have so much. I mean, I didn't know what it was, but it was like, there's something here. There's something, I want to know more about this. And so I think that this is potentially why people are interested. And the fact is, once you start to study the tradition and you start to apply some of what you learn, it actually works. It actually is very effective, and you start to go, wow. And, those moments of, ooh, what kind of a universe are we living in, happen when we start to apply some of these techniques. And I'd like to be very clear that I don't think it's all about technique, but it's about the foundation. Anyway, I don't want to take up more time. I want to hear what the other,
Yeah.
Mari and Joy and Shu have to say. So that's I think.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
I think I'll go. I think practically it's the structure and methodologies as well that is very attractive in traditional astrology. It gives people a way to, if you've come from more of an open-ended kind of style of astrology, like the modern sort of trend, well, that was my experience coming to a traditional perspective. I really like the structure and the just the systematic kind of approach, although it doesn't have to be constricting or limiting, but I really did appreciate that structure. And more philosophically, I think that I guess it's human nature to always want to come back to your roots, and whether that is from a lineage perspective, or whether it's just, coming back to some kind of foundation within yourself. And I think, if you've studied something long enough, you really want to always just go back to see where it all came from. And I think that's kind of like a bit of a metaphor for life in a way. So that's my kind of philosophical and practical kind of answer to that question.
Yeah.
Can I just add one thing? So I've just noticed somebody's asked for a brief definition of what traditional astrology is. And I know that Josh sent us a little something, and he described traditional astrology. And I guess for me, I think that traditional astrology is everything from its the horoscopic astrology, using a horoscope. There was, previous to that, there was probably millennia of, people looking at the sky and, looking at it to see whether or not the crops would grow well and everything. But there wasn't this idea of having signs in a horoscope with particular degrees and whatnot. That sort of came together, it appears, at this point around the Hellenistic period. And it drew a lot of different traditions, the Egyptian, the Babylonians, and several others together, and codified this. And I think that principally those foundations were pretty much the same up until, I would say, the beginning of the 18th century in the Western world, when the scientific age took over, and there was a lot of babies that were thrown out with the bathwater, and astrology went through a bit of a dark period, in the sense that it was not, respected. And it kind of, as a result, sort of got reinvented in the late 19th, early 20th century to what we know as modern astrology, which was somewhat detached or divorced from its lineage, which I love that word, Shu, because I think that's a really important thing. Anyway, I just saw that on the thing, and I just thought that's my definition of traditional astrology. So it's very broad.
Yeah. What about you, Mari? If you had to take a stab at why you feel that traditional concepts have taken root in our community and the contemporary space?
Well, one of the things that I personally found was that it gave me a structure. Like Shu, it was really an ability to be able to say, okay, I can look at this, and these are the things I can consider, rather than just having a grab bag where you stuck your hand in and thought, maybe it's that, or it could be that, or it could be that. But having a structure and a process, for example, in judging a matter or a question or whatever, you have a process that you develop, and that gives you, I won't say guardrails, but it gives you a sense of being able to get to the matter, rather than guessing or intuiting or whatever, something really basic. And also, I think the growth of traditional astrology has come as a consequence of its exposure via the translations that Eve and Shu have talked about, but also it gives you a sense of the context in which astrology exists and has existed over millennia. Like it's not something that just popped up suddenly because Alan Leo or Kepler had a good idea. It's something that has been evolving with humans for thousands of years. And to have that context, to be able to read, for example, Manilius and his take on the sky, or to listen to what Firmicus has to say and his advice to what astrologers should and shouldn't be, what they think, the things they do, it gives you a sense of, look, I'm part of this. The lineage, the heritage, whatever you want to say. So it's just, understanding that you have a place, that you aren't like you're just not working out of a vacuum. So
Mm,
yeah, I think that's what traditional astrology provides to the modern astrologer, and also it's what triggered for me my interest and therefore the study.
mm. Anything that you want to add, Joy?
Yeah, it's funny the word I wrote down, Mara, which is so funny because
Mm.
I think we've been working so long together that we kind of pick up words from each other. But I literally wrote on these questions. For me, it is like rails, like
Mhm.
this idea of otherwise you're like those bumper cars that just
Mhm.
careen from one side of the course to the other.
Mhm.
And for me, that's what traditional did. It gave me something to kind of contain my astrology. And also, I have to say, there's a huge link for me, in as much as human nature is drawn to the chords of music. There's a rhythm and there's a pattern and there's a music. The music of the spheres is not a joke. And I think you kind of start to get into this patterning the more you practice traditional astrology and you hear the music of being able to connect to things. And I guess that's my main thing of moving from the principles of modern astrology into a flow of something that I was like in a stream. Because there tends to be, and I'm Josh, this is not drawing blood, I'm not doing
Yeah.
that. But there is this sort of sense of saying, oh, now we're going to talk about the sun, and then we're going to talk about the moon, and then we're going to talk about the ascendant, and now we're going to talk about the midheaven. And it has a disjointedness, I believe, that you don't get in traditional, because you're absolutely flowing in this stream of energy that is beyond you. And it's exhilarating and it's exciting and it's frightening at the same time, all of those things. But it's something that I get from the traditional. And I think that's why when so many of us say, once you start practicing these principles and you adhere to them and you know what the guardrails are, you don't tend to go back, because it takes you in a flow of stream of just amazing energy that you're lucky to be carried along by.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just as we lead into the next question that I had for everyone here, one of the things that I think we can all recognize is that astrology has evolved in accordance with the prevailing worldview. If our celestial symbols are things that are going to speak to us about the daily lived realities that we face, then we have to have a mechanism by which they're going to speak to us at our personal level in terms of where we're at, in terms of our understanding of the world that we live in. And I think that the rise of psychological astrology and even the spiritual dimension of astrology is something that has happened in accordance with that worldview, that our breadth of language that we ascribe to planetary symbolism has grown so vastly in order to be able to encapsulate this new worldview. And it's probably the primary reason that at least I feel most people are drawn to the modern approach first and foremost, because it speaks so directly to our prevailing worldview, our expectation of what life is and how we meet it. But that's something that's very temporal or ephemeral to a certain extent, because when we look back through the corridor of history, if we think, for instance, an outer planet like the planet Uranus, where it used to be ascribed to people who were in same-sex relationships, because that was something that was cutting edge. And as time has moved forward, that's starting to lose its signification in that sense. It's sort of grown and evolved. And the point of asking this question in this way is because after we come through the door of the modern route to astrology, that seems to be where most people are coming in and learning about astrology first and foremost. But my view is, and I wonder what your view is here, is that traditional astrology is something that is timeless. As you had mentioned, everyone sort of touched on this in their own way, be it in terms of the structure, or as Joy said, in terms of you're in the flow with something here. This is something that has existed and been passed down for thousands of years, and it's something that exists outside of the prevailing worldview. So, with that in mind, we can obviously recognize that there are significant differences between the more modern humanistic approach to astrology and the traditional approach. Now, everyone on the panel tonight has been engaged in astrology quite seriously for a number of years, obviously, some longer than others. But just as someone who has been through the process, Eve, you mentioned this yourself, that you came through the lens of modern astrology. What are some of the misconceptions that you feel that modern practitioners have about traditional approaches? Where do you think that there are breakdowns or it's viewed
Okay.
erroneously?
Yeah, I love this part of it, misconceptions. Um, well, I think one of the main misconceptions is that it's just a bunch of rules. And so you can learn it because you just learn the rules, you apply them, and voila. So there's no soul, there's no spirit to it. It's just, there's no intuition, which, as well, anyone who practices knows absolutely not true. I think that's one of the main misconceptions. The other one I would say is that it's very black and white. There's no gray or color. It's very, and I have to say, when I first approached, I remember the first book I opened, it was some translation, a little A5 book that probably was some translation by Project Hindsight in the sort of mid 90s. And I picked it up, and, they were talking about dignities and using terminology that I had never come across, and I really didn't know what the hell it was about. And the footnotes were like half the page, so it was like I thought, oh my God, this is, I wanted something in plain English that I understood. So I actually bought Lee Lehman's books because it was written in plain English and I understood it. But I think, yeah, the main misconception is that it doesn't have a connection to our intuition. And I think that, you only need to read, I mean, even Lilly talks about, and I know he was a later in the tradition, 17th century, but, he speaks about that idea of, you have to be present with, I mean, he doesn't use these words, but he's basically saying you need to be present with your client and you're there to help them. So, you try and see what you can do. So I think astrologers, in the past, we only have the ones who wrote, and that's all we have left. We don't know about all those possibly hundreds of thousands of astrologers who worked and they never left written work. So we don't know how they were working, but they were human beings. And I've come to an understanding that we haven't really changed that much. We're still, drawn and driven by the same desires. The technology in our world may have changed. And just one last thing I'd like to say about language, which you mentioned, Josh. And for me, I think language is the greatest thing that can bring us together, but it also can separate us because I'm known around town if I go to an astrology lecture for asking questions, and most of them are like, can you please define what you mean by the word mind or soul or spirit? Because people will use these words and we all go, yeah, we know what that is. But each one of us might be having a different idea of what that means. And I think so often in modern astrology books, you will have these terminology, which we all can relate to, but for all we know, we are relating in a different way. And so I think that it's really important for us as astrologers or as human beings to really be clear when we start talking about these more esoteric concepts. What do we mean by that? And I'm the first one to say, and we're allowed to change our mind over time as to what that exactly means. We might come to a new way of understanding it.
Mm.
I don't know if I've actually yeah. So I think that's it.
Yeah, I mean, there's many different ways that you can approach it, right?
Yeah.
And that's obviously a big one. What about you, Shu?
Mm.
I agree with Eve. My answer to that was the whole nature of being black and white. Most people immediately think that it is kind of this fatalistic, non-nuanced kind of language, where that could be further from the truth. Like, there is so much nuance in traditional astrology because it really incorporated a whole heap of symbology that was just expected to be common knowledge back in the day of like everyday people. Like, and hence why the texts are written in, in a way that some people might call harsh or like very rough, or rough language. However, it was kind of just a known thing that the common people understood what was meant to represent various symbols of each planet, or various deities and archetypal kind of, saints or gods or whatever they wanted to call it, whatever their pantheons were. It was just kind of a layer of understanding that common people had back in the day that we have lost connection with today. So so it is highly nuanced, highly sophisticated and complex. It's just that we're just relearning and rediscovering what that language was all about.
Yeah, I think that when you read traditional texts, as you say, to just riff a little on your point about the harshness of it, I'm reminded of the fact that, writing and recording one's thoughts at that time was a lot harder than what it is today. And sometimes you pick up a traditional text and you read one single line that just lands like an anvil, and you think, well, God, I can't say that to my client. And the the idea being that it's not really meant to be didactic, is it? It's meant to be something that's going to springboard the practitioner into thinking about the complexity of what they've written. So yeah, I totally agree with that. What about you, Murray?
Well, I think one of the misconceptions is that it doesn't take into account free will. Like, here's your fate and that's it. And I find that really quite interesting, because free will is it's such a big thing. You were told that you have free will to do this, etc. But our free will is only as free as the circumstances we find ourselves in. And we might say, well, okay, I've got free will, I can eat anything I want. But if you are in a particular situation where really you're down to bread and water, that's all you have. That's all that's the only way you can operate. So I think what traditional astrology emphasizes, I believe, is that, look, you're human. These are the parameters around which you operate or survive or live, etc. And the decisions that one makes will be determined very, very strongly by what Saturn's doing, how your Venus is operating, etc. Because that's the social, the psychical, the cultural context around which you operate. So a Saturn Venus in one culture will be experienced very differently to someone who lives in another culture. However, the essence of that Sat Venus is the same. So it's not about saying you're never going to have a relationship, etc. But it's going to make a point, and that I think that's what I try and tell my clients or students, etc. That really, free will is minuscule compared to the context of your life and the circumstances in which you find yourself. So, yes, you have free will, but really everything else will push you into a particular corner where your free will is going to be meh 5% if you're lucky. That you're going to be open. You don't have 100% free will 100% of the time. So that's I suppose one of the greatest misconceptions I think that modern astrology has of the tradition. And the other thing I find too is that people say, oh, it's too complicated. I just want to know X. But then again, you go back to the whole thing of it's nuanced, it's contextual, and it's also complex because life is complex. It isn't, you don't have a one-word answer for any situation. It's like saying someone who's in grief, oh, get over it. Like no. So yeah, so those are the two things that I find misconceptions of traditional astrology.
Yeah. How about you, Joy? I don't want to leave you out.
Okay, no, you won't learn. That'll never happen.
Uh,
I've got an opinion about everything. Okay, absolutely. Yep, coming off the back of yours, Mari, there's an idea that anything is impossible sometimes in our modern society, and the truth is life is limiting. Get over it. I guess as an old bird, that's what you start to realize.
yeah.
And the other thing the other thing that I still grapple with it, and I have to find my own expression for it, is to be aware that the female role in traditional text is very limiting. And that's the thing that I find is I agree with modern astrologers with it as well. There are 2 planets only that are feminine. Even using the term masculine or feminine has triggers these days. And to the ancients, they divided their signs into 6 were masculine signs, the air and the fire signs, and 6 of them were feminine, which were earth and water. But even using terms of gender are triggering people now. So it is that sense of saying, okay, how do we adapt to the limitations of the female role, which was very much part of the traditional. And you'll notice that in the texts and all the translations, there are very few female astrologers. They're male. They're the scholars, they're the artisans of this craft. And so we now find we're in a world where if you go to a conference, 95% are women, So there's a change here in gender and interest in astrology that wasn't there back in the traditional text. And sometimes it's very limiting to say we have the moon, which is the mother role, and we have Venus, which is the lover role. And in fact, if you go back to any work in sect, anything that shows an out of sect Venus has these terrible moral connotations to them about a fallen woman or a woman who's going to be your undoing or one that will take you into the pits of hell or all these kind of moral kind of statements. Even if you go back to Gilgamesh's The Epic of Gilgamesh, where he takes Inanna, he takes Istad apart and starts creating all these beautiful. Absolutely. The best text of astrology, Josh. The first one you read is the Epic of Gilgamesh. But this whole idea that, she is a bad woman, or she's a woman, and he reads out all her crimes against men and all the things she's done wrong and all the ways she's tripped over, like a sandal that trips a man or, an urn that burns my eye or all these sorts of things. And so it's very hard to say to people, how can I practice traditional astrology when I believe in women and the strength of women, and finding some sort of bridge between the traditional texts on Venus and the modern texts on Venus? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I would say, Joy, I totally agree with you, but I would say that this is something that you see across everything, not just astrology. The past, the people who were writing were, almost always men. There were some women who usually were in the convents, the nuns. There were a few who did some like philosophical writings and stuff, but and it does skewer the whole past. And I do wonder to myself if the people who actually went to the astrologers, you know, not the astrologers who were working for the courts because they were working for the rich people, whatever, but just, the average astrologer in the village, how many of them were women? And how did they get, how were they dealt with? We don't know, because we don't have that. All we have is the written words, and the written words are definitely sort of skewered against women. And but it's also like the idea of night and the dark. Women, feminine is the dark. And anyway, just we could probably have a couple glasses of wine and discuss this at length.
You do
Absolutely.
have a panel of women here, must add.
Sorry, Josh. No,
I was
you
going to
can
make
join, Josh.
I was going to make a few tongue-in-cheek comments, and I thought, oh, it's not the room.
You better not.
I'll get torn to shreds here.
We might draw blood.
But it's interesting. It's
interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting also that the whole of the feminine, because what the astrology that's come down to us is the astrology of the male hierarchy, right, that displaced the original Bronze Age civilizations that were matriarchal and centered around the great goddess. And also I think that's a one thing, but the other thing too is that in terms of scribal stuff, I mean, a woman was not allowed to be a scribe. So the only person who was going to take down notes was a man, and therefore who had a scribe was usually someone in power, someone, a man, etc. Even powerful women did not have scribes. So again, that the power of the written word is assigned to the masculine, and it keeps the feminine out of the conversation. So, I think that's our challenge, isn't it, Joy?
Yeah, it's our challenge as astrologers today.
Absolutely, yeah.
To actually, and as Joy said, of course, you go to any conference or group, and usually, actually now I think it's probably about 90%. Maybe not 95, but I used to always think it was very interesting that most of the lecturers were men, and yet most of the people that were attending were women. And now it seems to be it's evening off a little bit. But that struck me when I first got interested in astrology, just as a general rule. So traditional or not, it seemed to be, anyway, male dominated on some level, even though more women were interested.
I wonder, as it came out of the universities and started to lose its credibility and started to lose its contact with science, where we have this gender swap over. It's almost like the women can have it now.
Yeah, just let the women do it,
Yeah.
It's just, a little bit of fluff.
Yeah. And let's not take it seriously. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
You're not to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
Unless it's spoken about by a man. Like, there would have been women who were interested in astrology, who dabbled in astrology, etc. But who are the people we remember, even in the 19th and 20th centuries, primarily men.
I think there's something to be said too, just on this topic, that that women tend to be, by virtue, more reflective and intuitive. And that's not to say that men can't play that role as well. But when we think about the sort of astrology that was being practiced throughout history, a lot of what was being put forward was largely more centered around, as we know, objective realities and concrete realities. And I think that the worldview at the time probably didn't have a lot of space for a more nuanced, reflective, feminine perspective in the way that it does today. So I'm not surprised to see that a bulk of our audience tonight are women. And as you say, the bulk of people going to astrological conferences are women, because our worldview is aligned with a more nuanced and intuitive approach to symbolism in a way that I think it probably wasn't before.
Oh, I have to control myself here and say that women are just as capable of concrete thinking as men.
Yeah.
And I probably come across as an hysterical woman, but I just think that this idea that gender, it's contained by gender, is something that not just we have to lose in astrology. To me, it's starting to be not just about traditional and modern, but also about this, this gender idealism that, women are more intuitive, which I think is total BS. And that women can't think in a concrete way, which again, I think is total BS. That's me. I'm going to get out of here.
Yeah, but that's
think
just a social construct that has happened because women were allowed to be intuitive because that's not important, and men were like they were the smart ones who were doing all the concrete important stuff in the world. And so so it was kind of like society kind of forced both genders, so to speak, into these roles. But they we're all human beings and we're all individuals, which is even more complicated because when you think about it. But yeah, no, it's you've opened up a can of worms now. You have, Josh? You did.
This could be a
Yeah.
whole other panel.
Every front has a back, right? Mari, you made a really interesting comment that I think is going to lead us into the next area of discussion. And this is such a rich area of discussion. So this is a place where we could probably spend the rest of our evening, if not the rest of our week, which is that traditional astrology is often derided as being fatalistic, which you touched on. And it's seen as to people who come through the psychological or psycho-spiritual perspective of astrology, traditional concepts are seen to limit the creative reaction that someone is able to have in their own life. That if you issue a prediction of sorts, that you're pulling the rug out from under someone's ability to be able to creatively respond and to write their own story, so to speak. And just within that framework, the idea that if we're couching this through the lens of a misconception, what would you say in reaction to that? How do you feel when you hear comments that traditional astrology is either limiting or that the predictive element is unethical?
I think I commented on that earlier, so maybe even Joy and Shu
Yeah,
can
sure.
talk
Yeah.
about that, But yeah,
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the misconceptions of traditional astrology
Mm.
is that it's predictive. Yes, you may be able to predict, and I'm going to put that in inverted commas. All you're doing is you're seeing. I mean, I do a lot of horror. So in horror, you're making a judgment, and very often there's a question that's very specific. Will I get the job? Or, is my father-in-law going to die? Because I need to know this for whatever reason. And there's certainly things you can see in a chart that are going to show you a certain potential outcome that is the most what's the word I'm looking for? The most obvious. But the fact is, and coming back to what Mari said about free will, a concept which actually only sort of came into being sort of through the Christian fathers who really were very hung up on this idea that we have the free will to either choose to sin or to choose to do the right thing. And so this was one of the reasons why they had a problem with astrology, which they saw as being predictive. But in fact, it was argued by many at the time very eloquently that, in fact, astrology wasn't predictive in that sense. But what it did do, or what it allows us to do, is to say, okay, looking at the solar return for this coming year to your client, it looks like you might have issues with your health because there's something going on in the sixth house, and whatever it is being lit up. All you're doing is you're giving them not a prediction that they're going to get sick, but a warning that the things are lining up that might mean that they may have an issue with their health. So therefore, they should make sure to look after it. And if there's any sense that there's a problem, they should get to a doctor or to a physician of some sort or a healer. So it's more like you giving them a choice. They can choose to ignore it and to not do anything about it and get sick. Or they can choose to do something and they'll avoid it. Yes, Ari.
Sorry,
Oh,
Joe. Sure, I don't know whether
yeah,
I'm
no,
jumping
yeah.
in. Over you, sure. I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry, I think traditional is hugely predictive.
Mm.
Absolutely predictive. I don't use Horror Eve. I'm a natal astrologer, and all my work is done in predictive and natal work. But I swear by Time Lords, and that is prediction. I swear by
That's true.
periods of time given over to a planet, and that is prediction. I swear by solar returns because I can get timing devices, and I know from my clients I am spot on those dates. Now, that is not me bragging about it. That's me saying it is a predictive tool.
But does it
It's
predict what will actually happen to them, or do they still have a choice to
you
act
have a
in a way?
neighborhood. You have a neighborhood of what will happen. You'll have a
Yes.
neighborhood of how that energy unrolls because we know what these planets do.
Yeah.
And we have something called an ephemeris, which is a predictive tool. It looks at transits 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ahead. We are predictive people. Get over it.
Yeah.
And I think,
Yeah,
I
I
think,
guess
I-
for me, the idea of prediction is to say this is going to happen. There's nothing you can do
I
about it.
think,
That's what
one of the
Yeah.
issues I think with that is that often people mistake the notion of prediction versus prophecy, and it's two different things altogether.
Okay.
Prediction is this is the circumstances around this time, right? It's like a weather forecast. There's going to be a storm. Well, you can get wet and stand out in it, or you can take shelter. That's a choice, but you're not going to change the weather.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
Yeah. The
I think
prophecy.
that thank you. I think that clarified it because again, this is where language is important. What does
Absolutely.
prediction mean?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
because I agree 100% with what you're saying, Joy. Of course, you know when these things are, quote, in the sky going to happen and what the potential, what that might mean. But yes, it doesn't necessarily mean that I mean,
Going to get wet.
yeah, a person can take shelter and come through that. And Shu, what did you want to say? I didn't.
Well, I guess coming back to the what I interpret to be the question is that I just think in traditional astrology, you really get that visceral feeling of that saying that the chart never lies. And it is the truth, and it's the hard truth or the easy truth. And I think over the modern years of astrology, we've learned to kind of bend that truth a little bit, to be a bit more open-ended for whatever reason. Perhaps it's leftover, fears, from what we have experienced from the past or whatnot that has sort of created this kind of mentality. But I guess when you come back to these traditional texts, even the way things are written seems really harsh. But within that, it is essentially the truth of the matter. And it's ultimately astrology is a tool for us to all connect with the real selves, like the truth of our being. And it's just a matter of aligning that. And that it is essentially, when we're doing predictive work, it feels like that word predictive or like even prophecy, there was that discussion around that. But to me, it's really like time traveling. Like we're like remote viewers for time and space. Like we can go to instead of going to a coordinate of like a certain country, we're going to any time, whether it's in the past or a couple of weeks away or in the future. So all we're doing is essentially understanding the functioning of time, which is the functioning of the universe that we are all actually a part of.
Yeah. And maybe for me, this brings up this idea of and I think this is a modern concept, and we speak about language and the context in which people today, I think the idea of anything negative is seen as being, no, you can't do that because you're going to put that idea into their head. And that's terrible. If you just put these good, positive ideas, then they're going to have a good, positive life and they'll never suffer anything, which is, of course, as we all know, untrue. And that's not the way the world works. And that, I think, is why the idea of prediction is such a a taboo one in the modern astrological context, but also just maybe in the modern world. And yet, so many people will go see a tarot reader. They'll go see, I don't know, all
But
sorts of
but
psychics and
even
things.
at the most basic level, Eve, you know, you go people who invest in the stock market,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
People, you're always thinking, oh, interest rate's going to go up or they're going to go down or whatever. You buy a house, you think, oh, when am I going to sell it, etc. You're looking at the market. That's prediction.
Mm.
We look at the weather every day to say, well, what am I going to wear? Am I going to wear a jumper or shorts? You
Mm.
know,
And
uh,
also, I wanted to add that
yeah,
this is largely a Western culture predicament.
Yes.
Like when
mm,
you go to other
absolutely,
cultures, they want the predictions. It's not a bad word. It's like,
Yeah.
well, what else am I here?
absolutely,
I'm not here to listen
absolutely,
to, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
In fact,
So,
that's what they're going to an astrologer for.
mm,
And they
yeah.
want
And if you
they
don't give that to them,
yeah,
they
they're like, what are
will
you
not
doing?
like it. They
yeah.
won't come back.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I
I'm
want you to
going to a
tell.
different one. You're a
I
terrible
want.
astrologer.
Yeah, I want you to tell me when I'm going to get married because that's really important to me and my
Yeah.
family. You know.
Mm.
Really great ways of looking at it. And again, there's so many different ways that we could look at that, and we could spend all week on this really. But with the interest of covering as much ground as we can, just shifting gears slightly away from discrepancies between approaches and looking a little bit more around the education side of things. So everyone who's on the panel tonight is actively involved in astrological education. And one of the things I was curious about from everyone's perspective was, firstly, what's your experience of teaching traditional concepts? And do you find in your process of guiding students through the somewhat complex material that, and as we said before, traditional concepts can be challenging to learn. There's a lot of them. Eve, you made reference of, half-page footnotes, things like that. Do you find that there are any common themes or common challenges that you've encountered with students as they go through that journey?
Besides the house system issue, it would be, I think, the layers of considerations that need to be applied to any kind of judgment or delineation for whatever chart, whether it's natal or horary or whatnot. I think when you're moving from a more modern perspective to understanding, how these ancient astrologers were working, sometimes they were looking at over 100 things to be able to come to a judgment. And I always say that nothing cancels anything out. You life is complex and you just keep adding these layers of information and you have to kind of make an analysis of what your judgment is. And I think that really comes from the fact that, well, in some ancient astrologers who were more politically based, I mean, their predictions could get them killed if they
Absolutely.
gave a black and white answer and it's a yes or no and it's not right. So that's why they were adding in all of these other layers to say, oh, well, it's the answer's this, but if you did that, maybe this person might help. And they brought in all the complexities, which in our modern use of it, it gives us a great language for all these nuances that we can use in our tool belt. But I find students really find it really challenging to then realize there's more than just houses, planets, and house cusps and sign rulers. There was all these other things like, the solar phase cycle or like various fixed stars or different lots and, all these dignities and everything needs to be thrown into the mix and nothing cancels anything out.
Mm.
So that's
Yeah,
the art.
I think, I mean, I'm sitting here and maybe the way I teach is I'm pretty, um, I'm a firm believer that in a way, like even if you're looking at the tradition, there's a million, like, okay, like you mentioned the lots, I don't use lots, but I use the part of fortune. And I have recently, sorry, Joy, but I have recently decided not to flip for day and night. Now, the reason I came to that is from a logical, rational perspective that made sense to me, and from what I can understand of some of the very ancient traditions, and the Hellenistic lots came out of this idea of sect, and so that's a whole other thing, which is fine in its own right, and that can be brought into whatever we're doing. But I'm a firm believer that in a way this is an art, and the more you learn, the more tools you have, but then you get to a point where you start to choose the tools that work for you. And I believe that there are some we resonate with, and some that it almost feels like we're just trying to, what's the word? Like we're trying to make it work. And that's not to say that the tool is wrong, because in somebody else's hand, it could be, it's the thing that brings the magic to their art. So I think it's really important to also know what to eliminate, not
I
just
see.
what to
Yes.
bring into the astrology. Because whilst I used to think, oh my God, modern astrology, look at all those 150 million asteroids you can plop into your chart and it'll look like a big black ink blob, and some people see that and they can read something into it. Well, the tradition, you had some particular astrologer like Schoner who would like create these almutants
Mm.
that were like, had like 13 points and like an almutant for anything. And I mean, to me, it's like, really? You don't really need to do that. Do you know what I mean? So, but
I
whether
think you hit the point there, Abe, about tools. It's like any artisan has a whole range of tools, but you don't use all of them on one job.
yeah,
You pick
Depends on
and
the
choose
context.
the context, the question, the matter at hand, will dictate how you apply those tools, to what extent you apply them, and what else you might add to that,
yeah,
And I think that's the thing with astrology generally, whether it's modern
yeah,
or traditional. But one of the things that I found teaching was that I think, and this might be my bias, okay, but the mentality of new astrologers who want everything quickly, like I call it the takeaway mentality. I want a burger with a lot, with the chips and a drink and whatever, and I'll have it in 5 minutes. You know, you can't do that with astrology. You actually have to invest time and energy into it, and it's not you can't you don't learn it in 10 weeks. You know,
yeah,
and that I think that, to me, that's always been the greatest barrier to overcome,
yeah,
you know? So,
yeah.
I'm going to come in as a gremlin in the works, because that's who I am.
mm,
Okay, accreditation. Let's talk about it. Okay, because that's the question. The thing is that accreditation gives the impression that this will be like a higher learning experience. I'm going to get a piece of paper and then I'm going to go off, put that piece of paper on my wall, and I'm going to make a living as an astrologer. And I'm here to tell you, I've been in this business for 30 years. I've written 3 books. I've taught for 30 years, and I am poor as a church mouse. Don't believe the thing you see behind me. So this impression that accreditation is going to give you legitimacy and a viable income working as an astrologer is just not realistic. And I bless the people that are able to make oodles of money from astrology, but I don't know anybody that does.
Yeah.
I know a few astrologers. So, that thing about people coming in and getting accreditation is often not about, making astrology credible, because we're working against 3, 4, I don't know, 5 centuries of bias against us. So
Yeah.
accreditation of a piece of paper is not going to change that. And I know that's a very dark view. And yes, I am a gremlin, and I'm sure after this I'm probably banned from the TAA, but that's so be it.
No,
but
not at
I think
all.
I
It's
think I
great.
think that's the challenge, though. What Joyce was saying, it's accreditation versus education, because they're not the same thing. They're
Eh,
not the same thing. You
yeah.
know, education is everything. Accreditation, like Joyce says, it's a piece of paper.
Hey, the word education, I saw an interview with a woman named Jane Elliott, I think, who did the blue eye, brown eye things
Yeah,
back
yeah, yeah.
in the 70s, 60s.
Mhm.
And she talked about an educator is someone who takes the hand of the ignorant and leads them to the light. And I thought, or it was, I might be, saying it slightly different, but I love that idea of leading the ignorant to the light. You're not, that the idea of just presenting, here's the light, whatever we're trying to teach,
Yeah.
and just, people being ignorant of something, being able to see it. And I think that to me is what's exciting about teaching, is when you do get those,
Uh-huh.
feedback where people go, oh, and
Absolutely.
for me, I think one of the most amazing things was there was a particular woman who lives in Adelaide who's been a professional astrologer and tarot reader, and I think she makes a reasonable living doing it. Elizabeth somebody. And she did the Horary course, and when I started talking about dignity and reception, she suddenly went, oh my God. It's like after 20 years or 25 years, she had never understood what this was about. And when it was presented to her, it just opened things up.
Mm.
And to me, that is what I live for.
Mm.
When you get that, it's like it's so exciting because now you know that they're hooked,
Yep.
and yet you got them.
They've
I
taken
would
the bait,
also,
Eve.
what's that?
They've taken the bait.
That's right, right. Hook and sinker. They're gone. But also I think accreditation is really interesting because to me this is an art, and there is no art in the world, whether it's painting, music, whatever, that can be accredited in any way. Yes, you can go to an art
Absolutely.
school and you can get a little piece of paper, but it means nada. And the real artists that sort of appear often have never gone to school. They, I mean, they might have done their own study, but they don't have an accreditation. So yes, it is a difficult thing.
Mm.
Because at the same time, I think every person who wants to learn astrology should learn something about the history and their lineage and the foundational, but I don't know if that's possible.
Well, again, as educators, that's what we're there to do. I'm going to go back to 1997 when the Australis Congress was on here in Adelaide. And at the opening, there was a little bit of a ceremony. Rob Hand gave his usual thing. But one of the things that occurred was that a candle was lit, and that candle was passed on, so everybody's candle got lit.
Lovely.
And that exactly is what we do as astrological educators, is you pass the light on. And however that light takes, it's not for us to say, this is what you should do. You should be a professional astrologer. I mean, you know, Joe and I have been teaching for, I hate to think how many years, but never mind. Every person that sat in that class, whether it's been for, 1 unit or 4 years or whatever they've taken and they've taken to their lives, that's made a difference. We don't know how it's made a difference, but it has to have made a difference. And I think, well, to me, that's my work is done in that sort of way,
Yeah, yeah.
Let's
And
add this next one in, because I feel like these two questions are really kind of linked to one another. This whole concept of accreditation, that in a broad sense, I think that when, sorry, Shu, can someone unmute me? Hang on one sec. Sorry, go. Why don't you jump in?
Sorry. No, what was your question?
I'll just put this forward and sort of blend what we're talking about here. That the idea of certification, I think, brings a lot of people to astrology. I think that when they're eager to learn, the idea that they can, it's not so much. I think there are many reasons why people come in and want to get a certification. Partly because they want to be good at it. Partly because they may want to practice it for a living. But also too because I think the concept of a certificate or a sense of accreditation gives someone a sense of structure that they're going to go through here and they're going to there is a pathway to it. The idea that at the end, if you get an award, then we must be teaching to a curriculum. But as we know, where astrology sits globally, many of the old guard membership bodies that exist around the world that offer accreditation processes, for the most part, I feel are fairly heavily skewed towards the modern approach to astrology. That if you go through the accreditation process, then you're being asked to psychoanalyze someone. So just thinking about that and thinking about the idea that what you brought up earlier, Eve, about in answer to the question about what is traditional astrology, if that is an umbrella term that encompasses all of the astrology that was practiced from its early inception all the way up to the 19th century, really, when Alan Leo started to change things. Um, that's a really long period of time, and we have a lot of different modalities even within that expanse of time being practiced, a lot of different ways of looking at symbolism, even the concept of whole sign versus quadrant houses, just to sort of even just put that on the table, is something that just shines
You
a
don't
light
want to
on
open that can of
No.
worms.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
well, it shines a light on the fact that traditional astrology has taken many forms over a long period of time. So, with that in mind, and some of the other complexities of this subject matter, firstly, how do you feel about certification? Do you think that it's important? Do you think that it's become a bit of a marketing tool, perhaps? And do you think it's necessary in the traditional space?
Well, I don't think it makes you a better astrologer, but I think if it makes people feel more confident in themselves or more um, valid to be able to pursue this kind of path, then I guess that's doing something in one's own confidence. But I think having gone through a certification process, and I guess they're all different, or different courses have different disciplines, it kind of shows that people have gone through some kind of practice or a sense of discipline to be able to undertake the um, undertake the study of astrology, which is not an easy thing. It doesn't necessarily lead to a better astrologer. That comes with practice, but it's kind of like learning a language where once you learn one language, you start to be able to learn another language much easier because you understand the process of learning languages and what's involved. And I think astrological certification kind of gives you that little bit of framework or maybe some kind of cognitive understanding of how these concepts are being put together and to be able to apply your own discipline and critical thinking so that it kind of makes a little bit of difference in terms of how you can hold yourself moving forward in a career, or if you want to pursue this. But I don't think it actually makes you a better astrologer at all.
And I mean, I would say one of the problems with accreditation of any sort is really there is no standard. I mean, I think I got a diploma or something from astrosynthesis, which is a very modern type of astrology. I did the FAA exams many years ago, and and I mean, I almost failed one because I used a traditional approach to a medical chart, which I gave my references and everything, but they still say, oh, you just didn't talk about this. And I'm like, what? It was, I don't know, Grand Cross, including the nodes or something. And I remember just thinking, well, hang on, I mean, I've probably studied more of the medical astrology on my own, not at this point, not with a teacher, but just through books and stuff. And I thought, I know that I knew that what I was saying was right. So accreditation is like, there is no standard. Like if you've got an accreditation from an astrology school, what did you actually learn? I agree with Shu and with a few others that, having some people want that piece of paper because it gives them a sense of I'm doing this study and I have this structure and I know that when I come out of it, I will have learned or been exposed to certain things. But the problem with astrological accreditation is that, if you get a piece of paper from Mari and Joy's school or from, I don't know, some of the other Sydney School of Astrology or whatever it is, or if you get, the participant, the STA Hori. I mean, I know what you've gone through to get that because I teach it, but it's like they're all different. Do you know what I mean? And, it has a certain amount of, for some people, it's really important to have a piece of paper. For others, they just want to learn it. They don't really care. But I think a lot of people are attracted to, I'm going to do this course, and at the end of it, I'm going to have this piece of paper that says I've done this. But that piece of paper really doesn't tell us what we've learned. It just says astrology certificate from whatever astrology school. And as I think most of us have probably done things and gotten a little certificate of some sort, which I then put in my filing cabinet somewhere. No,
yeah.
what do you do? Yeah,
If I can say, I would be 100% behind accreditation if it was like accreditation that they do for the levels of, say, piano.
For
It's
what? I'm
almost
sorry.
like if it was like the levels of, say, the different levels of learning the piano.
Oh,
Because it's almost like a big stick, so you have to go home and you have to practice and practice and practice and practice. If accreditation was about not just turning up weekly for a class, if it was about saying every single morning with your cup of tea, open up a chart and do it. Open up and re-listen to this. Open up and do this. It must be that same level, and you need an accreditation that's like a huge stick that's going to clobber them if they don't get it, because most people think they will get accreditation by coming to a lecture once a week, making a few notes. There might be an assignment now and then, but it's like learning music, Eve. You can't learn an instrument without practicing it every single day. Or a language, Shu. You can't learn a language if you don't practice it every single day. It's technique, but it's also practice. And this is something that does not seem to apply to astrology. It's this idea that, I'll catch up on that lecture, I'll do that, and I'll think about it next week. It doesn't work that way. Astrology is almost like a cell thing, like it almost has to be absorbed into your
Cellular.
It's cellular, exactly.
Yeah.
It's organic. And the only way you learn anything organically, whether it's a language or a musical instrument, or astrology, is to practice, 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 and spend hours and weeks and months and years taking this stuff in.
Yeah.
And that's what I find about students, that their commitment is not, and I understand that they're a busy life. They've got so many things on their plate, but just doing a course that is once a week and for a couple of hours is not gonna hang anything. You might get your piece of paper, but you're not an astrologer. You need to.
This brings to mind, sorry, Mari, I'll just say this one really quick thing. There's astrology is a science and it is an art. And science, the word science meant the study of. So it is something you study. And it is an art is the practice of. So we might be able to accredit someone for doing the study, like having an exam where, what's the dignity of this, whatever, is this planet receding, that one? And, you could see if they've done the study of the rules or the concepts, or maybe even historical, the history of astrology or whatever, because this is something you can just study. But the art is the practice of. And I don't know that you can ever accredit someone for the practice.
Yeah.
And that brings me to my point, was to saying, if you're going to go the certification way or the practice or whatever, at what point do you say you're certified? What is the litmus test? There isn't one. It's like, as Joy said, practice, practice, practice. You get a piece of paper that says, your dignities, whatever, but certification implies that you are competent, that you are, and I think, and again, it goes back down to, how do you then apply that competency? Is it through an exam, a written one, an oral one? Do you have to, do whatever? I mean, it's a very complex thing, because again, what you are judging, technique versus knowledge versus application versus experience. It's all that stuff put together.
And I actually don't think it's unique to astrology. I think even a lot of formal degrees at universities. Like you
Yeah.
still, that was definitely the case with me. I
Yeah.
got out of uni and still had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's unique to astrology, but yes, having said that, it is, if we look at the way astrologers were in the past, there was like what Corey mentioned, this sort of master apprentice kind of situation where it's these little conversations that you hear, or just like absorbing things through osmosis by being with your master and hearing these things. That's those little bits that get you immersed and entrenched and know astrology at that cellular level that we just don't have today,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Absolutely.
Or we don't know. I mean, that's the thing, is you don't know how much, if someone is looking at charts every day and just delving into them, and they are learning so much by doing that. It has nothing to do with them being with a teacher or whomever. It's just, I mean, it's what you keep doing to keep learning. Sorry.
The only way I can see that happening is, say, if you are an astrologer and you have a child that's interested, and it's that level of connection that you need to have, like to be able to know the astrology,
to mentor them.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
so it does. I just don't think that level of transmission happens today.
Yeah. I think there's obviously a lot of gray areas around it, because while it can be beneficial to help people move forward, there's also the notion that someone gets to the end and they think that they're done, and they don't even know what they don't know. They've gone to the end of a process and they think, this is fantastic, all this work I've done. But astrology, as you mentioned before, Shu, that we all share the sky and everyone has a different perspective and a different way of practicing. We brought up the concept earlier of, artisans having 100 tools in their belt, and most certification practices are coming from one route or one particular dimension of practice. So there's certainly pluses and minuses across the board. So it's interesting to hear you talk about them. But I guess sort of moving towards the end of our session tonight, is where do you think we're at, and more importantly, where do you think that we're heading as a community of not just traditional astrologers, but also astrologers more broadly? Do you think that there's anything that what I've got written down here is, let me read it out. Where do you see traditional astrology heading in our community of diverse practitioners? And is there anything you think we could be doing better, or areas that you think that we should be focusing on that we're not at present?
Bring back the master apprenticeship formats.
Oh dear. Oh, well, I think that what you're doing, Josh and Rita, I think is a huge step forward. I think two things for me, being in Australia, and even though I know I've got this sort of American, quasi-Canadian, whatever accent that people sometimes mistake for Irish, but I have lived in Australia the vast majority of my life, and I feel that Australia, having gone overseas to certain conferences overseas, one thing I'm always struck by is that, generally speaking, the Australian astrologers seem to be really much more aware of, or much better generally, than a lot of the astrologers that I have met. Just, I'm not talking about the people that are lecturing, but just people you talk to that are going to conferences. So I think that Australia's got a huge pool of talent in the astrological world, and we should be, I feel, what's the word? Like not cutting down the tall poppies, but actually letting them grow taller. And also, it would be so nice to be able to have events that are not held at ungodly hours for the vast majority of Australians. I just find that so irritating. And as someone who teaches for a school which is international, I have had to fight to get, the lectures at a time which is not unreasonable for the students here and for me to be lecturing, because I did try and do it 2:30, 4:30 in the morning lectures, and
No,
the brain does not think
no,
properly at that
no.
time. And so for me, this is what I'd love to see, is maybe having more, things like this, but it would be even more wonderful if we could have things face to face, getting together, having mini conferences or mini, things where, yeah, we can just proudly, and we don't have to get someone from overseas. We can just tap into, I mean, just looking around at some of the people I'm seeing, I know there's a whole lot of talent there, because I know some of these people and I know that they're really good at what they do. And it's like, bring them forward, yeah. So, okay. So I had my say.
What about you, Murray?
Shut up. Eve.
Well, I echo what Eve's saying in terms of the support that we give each other in terms of showcasing work, but also providing platforms like this one, where everybody can have a say. That isn't just about one talking head or whatever, but inviting everyone to have an opinion as well. Having kind of and face-to-face things are really good. Again, not necessarily a conference where you have 200 people or whatever, smaller types of groups where you have like one stream, and
Like the
that,
Adelaide conference.
yeah, or
Yeah.
even Regulus,
Yeah.
where you showcased people's work. You had there was a time for people to both socialize and exchange information, listen to lectures, and it's there's nothing. Oh my God, what am I missing out on?
Yeah.
Which is what happens at conferences. You pay your money, you go to a conference, and you think, oh my God, there's 5 things on at once. Which one am I going to go to? So I think that support there is good, and just I think and I think also being accessible, being very accessible, which again, time is one thing, but also cost. People find it very difficult to get to places because there are huge costs in terms of both running and paying for things. So looking at ways in which to bring people together, like the Zoom platform is really great. But also looking at other ways that you could encourage it on smaller cellular levels and then expand it on a national level, that isn't formalized in terms of a conference. So, yeah.
Interesting.
And you, Joy?
Sorry, go
Oh,
on.
you're right. You shoot. Yeah.
Well, no, I just also, what I said about that master apprenticeship thing, it's not that way out of an idea. And I just think there is a lack of mentorship in astrology. Like there's a billion courses out there and webinars and whatnot. But really where people fall down is then like the application and the practice, and just having that mentor to sort of just answer one or two questions every couple of weeks, or, just to every time you hit a bit of a roadblock, you might not need to do a course. You might just need a 2-minute answer, and I think that kind of thing is really missing, and what could like make the difference between, astrologers that kind of just give up, or astrologers that end up being really great astrologers, So.
I mean, there is one astrologer here, but she's absolutely modern and is very proudly say, I don't do traditional. I'm just a modern astrologer, psychological. But well, I saw she advertised as a mentor to help people. And I think some of it was in helping them, actually make a living out of it. I don't know how much that worked, but how to set up a business as well. So I think there would be room somehow for that, which I think is a very exciting concept, so I like that.
How about you?
Sorry.
How about you? Where do you see, what do you think we could be doing better?
I think, I mean, for all the darkness that COVID brought, it brought, particularly for Australian astrologers, brought us into the light of the world. I think that it gave us the opportunity to talk to other astrologers on the other side of the world. That I think before Zoom we had Skype, or these sort of very underdeveloped sorts of things. And I'd have to say that what gave me absolute joy and pleasure was talking to young astrologers, some, like in their 30s, and then their 40s. To me, that's young, but who were well read, had read their traditional texts. They were discussing points on valence. They were talking about Ptolemy. They were bringing all these sort of amazing conversations, which, as both an Australian astrologer, I didn't realize were going on, and B, as a traditional astrologer, as a follower of Project Hindsight, you kind of believe that it came out and then it died and then it all went away. But I was talking to young people and young astrologers who had the same passion for the same text that I had. And to me, that was illuminating. That was so exciting, to be able to join in a community that I feel like I had been disconnected from both the Australian scene and perhaps from the traditional scene. So I'd have to say those conversations with those young astrologers and those young people was what gave me a resurgence in my astrology. It gave me a strong feeling of purpose to leave something in a kind of a legacy for those who come next. It's a small thing, and it may or may not help or not, but I just felt like I had to leave something in written word for them. And that to me was very, very important. And the other thing is to say, tolerance is what we need for each other, and diversity of ideas is a wonderful thing, and being kind to other astrologers, and don't write anything negative. Even if you think an astrologer has written something that is total BS, do not commit anything to paper or to Facebook or any other thing which discourages them. Just don't do it. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. And I've probably done nothing but say not nice things all for the last hour and a half. So what a hypocrite. But if you can, and if you're poised to give them a poison letter, stop and close it down. Because you have no right to do that. You have no right to do that.
It's called support, Joy.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's that old adage, silence is golden, and there are times it's very difficult for me, I must say, but yes, it is golden. And I would agree with that, because there are certain unnamed astrologer who is an incredibly talented writer who said lots of horrible things about modern astrology. And I think it got a lot of people's backs up. And I don't think a lot of, whilst it was very amusing and funny and entertaining, it was not fair, because there are some amazing astrologers out there. I'm thinking Lynn Bell, and there's a few others that do modern astrology that are absolute masters of their craft and of their art. And I think that, we shouldn't, I think this idea of being able to support and to say, hey, there is this thing, it's called traditional astrology. It may not be what you think it is. And, I trained originally as a modern astrologer, and there are still times when, little bits of that comes in, particularly when you're sitting with a client. And there's something that, there is something that comes from that is valid. And so we shouldn't be discounting anything. We should be encouraging everything, but just putting a bit of a light on the tradition to say, hey, join the lineage. I love Shu's idea of this, this river of
it comes down to respecting what respecting, your craft, whatever.
Yeah.
However it's practiced,
I think
you can take someone, you can ask the question, you can openly discuss a situation, but I don't think disparaging someone for their point of view or
Mm.
for their or for what not just what they say, but what they practice.
Mm.
It's not unless it's criminal in some way, but
Yeah, yeah. I
uh,
mean, I remember having this vision to me of astrology as a whole, like the whole
mm,
is like this tree, this massive tree that grew. It had big roots that reached very, very deep into the ground, and the branches reached out. Now I'm talking more what happened in Western astrology, because I know that in the East the history is a bit different. But at some point, which I sort of say was roughly at the beginning of the 18th century with the scientific revolution and whatnot, that tree was cut down.
mm,
But the roots are still under there, and it was cut down, and there were people, astrologers that came around, went, oh dear, this has been cut down. So they took a branch and they took cuttings from this, and this is where we have these different things that grew. And in some ways those cuttings have, they have these roots now, and the original roots and these newer roots are starting to come together.
mm,
And I think that's very exciting.
Mhm.
And, even the old tree is starting to sprout new little things. So it's starting to grow again. And that's kind of what is exciting. And I have no idea why I said that, but I
Yeah,
just thought it
well,
was a nice
actually,
image.
just to add to that, because I was thinking along the lines, looking at the question, that what I think traditional astrology needs is actually more um, translation work, more people that want to like enter into that rigorous practice of not only learning an ancient language, but to start really do more of the reconstructive work, because what we know in the West is actually so little. There's so much more that we don't even know about, even compared to what they know in Europe, like because there are so many more languages there, and people open having knowledge of different languages in Europe. So yeah, like in the Arabic texts or old Farsi texts and things like that. So
mm,
I think, and I mean, just a bit of my personal journey, having been studying in the Vedic texts, recently in my career, and being able to see examples being used in like 16th century horary texts, and see the same example being used in Sal's texts. They were the same examples, but slightly different interpretations. I thought, to me, that was just such confirmation of like, yes, these people were actually talking. They
Mm,
weren't working in isolation.
mm,
And, that's really what I love about
mm,
as you delve into these old texts, like who was talking to who and what examples were borrowed from who. And that can only happen when more and more people not only, you don't have to, I'm definitely not a translator myself, but at least reading different texts of different cultures to see and reconstruct our broken lineage, because it
yeah.
is very much broken here.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think it's also interesting to read the same texts that are translated by different people, because
yes,
Mhm.
then you'll
yeah,
see
absolutely.
slightly different, you
Yes.
know, understanding of how they
Yeah.
understood the language.
And the
And
Yeah.
difference, yeah, the difference too between the translation by an astrologer versus a classicist,
yes, yeah,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
language
where
person,
the
yeah,
nuances are
yeah,
much
Absolutely.
are
clearer.
So,
interesting.
no pressure, everyone. Once you get your certification, just
That's right.
head on to your university and learn an ancient language and
And
start putting it
start
together.
translating.
If
I
you
And
want
I
to see
think,
this move forward,
yeah, you mainly need to learn Arabic, I think,
yes,
and
yeah,
Farsi, as you
Farsi,
said.
Farsi,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's where the real goods are,
that's the
because the
gold.
Latin texts are
Mhm.
usually translations from the Arabic texts,
Hmm.
which are translations from the
From the
Hellenistic
Greek,
texts, which
from
no longer exist for the
yeah,
moment.
mm.
So,
Ancient Greek.
and
Mm.
yes,
Yeah.
that's what I meant. Hellenistic Greek. Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
It's really great hearing everyone's perspective. So thank you guys for coming on and sharing all your thoughts. And I might just wrap this up and just stop the recording at the moment, and then just make a few other announcements just for everyone out there. 1 second.